how are you doing today? I am bringing you another project for my Altenew Educator Certification Program, and I am focusing on watercolor. So, one thing that's very important for me when I buy products is that I have multiple ways to use them for multiple occasions, different mediums, etc. And with the Altenew products, I love them. One, you can get layered stamps and you can use the outline images, or you could use multiple layers that come with the stamp sets to color in your products by stamping. Also, they've got multiple mediums that you can use for watercoloring, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But for today, I am focusing on using my ink pads. So, my card features the stamp set called I Am Here For You. I chose this one because it's a beautiful tree, and depending on what colors you stamp it or watercolor it or you color it with in general, determines what season it's for. It's good for thinking of you, sympathy cards, encouragement, hello. I mean, pretty much anything you could use a tree for, you could use this for. It makes even very nice masculine cards depending on the colors that you use. So it met my requirement of multi-purpose. So, like I said, I decided to use my dye inks, my crisp dye inks, and one memento pad just because I didn't have a brown range. So for the tree trunk, I chose to color with caramel, toffee, and paper bag, which is from Altenew, and then rich cocoa with memento. And the reason I can mix the two different brands is because that they are dye inks. Typically, the caramel toffee and paper bag come with two other inks in the collection, but they're more yellow. They give a great golden yellow color, but obviously if I'm doing a tree trunk, I wanted brown, so that's why I brought in the memento. So what I did was smush my ink onto a glass mat, and I used a distress sprayer just to add a little bit of water off to the side and to the ink, and I'm using a very fine brush. I chose not to use an aqua brush because I can't control the amount of water very well, but I know that if I use an almost dry paintbrush, that I either have the capability of wiping it off with a paper towel or just not adding much water. So that is the route that I chose to do. So like I said, I started out with that caramel toffee, and then I brought in the memento rich cocoa to add some depth to that. And I love the way that looks right now, but then once I start adding the pinks, I realize I need some more contrast. So let's talk about the pinks. I am smushing down the colors Pink Diamond, Rubelite, and Raspberry, and those all come in a set, or you can buy those individually. So I'm using the same tiny thin brush, and I'm starting out with the Pink Diamond, and the Pink Diamond being the lightest color. I am sort of mapping out where I want the color to go, where I want the leaves to go. It gives a great base where I want to be. It also allows you to get a little bit messy, so you'll notice that I'm using a little bit more water here than what I do later on, and that's because with the darker colors, I'm going to start adding the fine detail of the leaves. So right now it's all about just getting the pink down on the paper, but you will notice that I start to lose a little bit of the browns. So that's when I come in with the caramel toffee and the paper bag, and that popped it to being almost a yellow orange gold color, and it made the tree trunk come to life. That's in my opinion. It does dry back a little bit. I'm using Canson XL watercolor paper on the smooth side just because I was stamping. And let's talk about the stamping. I used VersaFine Clear ink to do the entire image, and then I used clear embossing powder for that because that creates a little bit of a well and controls my watercolor, or in this case, my watercolor using ink pads. And that's just a little trick that I have learned, especially if you're not a professional watercolorist or, an advanced watercolorist. It kind of controls your color. I personally don't consider myself an advanced watercolorist. I kind of dabble in it. So I always welcome the wells per se. And another trick that I have learned is when you do the browns, you want to stay away from them and let those dry. And then when you move into your pinks and before you go on to your next colors, if you bring in a heat tool and dry it, you won't get as much running of the colors and you'll get more layers and more depth. So that is why you'll see me bring in the heat gun a couple times throughout the process. Now what you're seeing is I am taking the darker pinks, and those would be the Rubelite and the Razzleberry. And I am using a very dry brush. I do have a little bit of water down, but the brush itself is almost dry. In fact, I'm even letting the bristles kind of separate. That's how dry my brush is. And what I'm doing is I am stippling on the color. And that's where I got the texture. Once I was happy with that, I added water down to my panel. And basically, if you add clear water to an area and then you drop in your color, the color goes only where the water is. So that's a little trick too if you're trying to control your colors or you're not used to the loosey-goosey look. So I did the sky originally in Dewdrop, and then I did the exact same technique on the ground using the Firefly, which happens to be my favorite ink color of all time, just to paint in the grass. And at first I went in light, and I realized that I needed more color. I didn't opt to bring in a darker green. I just kept going with the Firefly. Then I bring out that Razzleberry. I just had to have more texture. Again, a very, very, very dry brush. And I'm dropping some of that in to some of the lighter colors in the leaves, but I'm also sprinkling some of that down by the base of the tree just to get that texture. And then I think I lost the footage of this, but I did bring in the Aqualicious to the sky just to make it pop more. Then I decided I wanted to add a little bit more detail to my card, so I brought out the diamond frame cover plate die set, and I cut that out just in white cardstock, and I layered that on top of my panel. Next, I used some white cardstock and stamped the Thinking of You sentiment from the same stamp set, and heat embossed that with clear embossing powder. I think that turned out very pretty, very crisp. I brought out a banner die from the Greetery, which I ended up chopping off. I just wanted to make sure I got a nice straight banner for my card because I like the perfection of a die cut. So before applying that and cutting it down, you'll see that I brought out my Bearly Art Glue, and I am gluing down my panel to my A2 card base. I use a 120-pound card base from Accent OPEG paper that I just cut down and make myself. I like a heavy card, and since the watercolor paper was heavy, I wanted something to balance that out. And then you saw me cut down that banner, and I popped that up with some foam tape. And now I'm just adding a few pink sequins from my stash. I think they were from HAI Supply. And I just kind of put that in a trio around it, around the image. So like I said, I don't think that this was a hard card to achieve. I think that it was an impactful card by adding all the different layers of watercolor. But again, I am stretching my supplies by using my ink pads. Another way you can stretch supplies is use your re-inkers, or you could use watercolor markers. There's a plethora of ways that you can color this, but if you want to get the biggest bang out of your buck for your ink pads, smush them down, pick them up with some water, a water brush, or with a paintbrush and start painting with them. And I think that they turn out absolutely fabulous. I'm going to leave you here with a few pictures, and I thank you so much. And if you wouldn't mind subscribing, I would really appreciate it. Until next time, keep crafting. Have a good one. Bye bye.